15 seconds.
Good morning. On the second part of Webster today, in response to a fair amount of public request and public interest, we're going to update the state of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Uranium Mining through an interview with Dr. David Bates, the chairman. That's second half of the program this morning. But first off the top, we're going to deal with a subject I tend to avoid: child abuse, baby battering. You know, you've only got to look at a picture like that and become terribly emotional and upset about it. But we're going to look at it today through a special report from Brian Coxford, and then we're going to interview some experts in the studio. So first, could happen to you, it could happen to your children, it could be happening to your neighbor's children, child abuse. I was one of those who was at least slightly suspicious on the helpline for children, the Zenith line. But look at Brian Coxford's special report on child abuse before the panel and see what you think.
Like when I first learned how to ride a bike, I tried to pump the back tire up, and instead the air came out, and she beat me with this stick, right? And that's kind of a stupid reason to beat your kid.
It's shocking to realize that that kind of child abuse exists, but it's commonplace in today's society. 8,000 cases of child abuse in British Columbia each year, and among them, at least 12 deaths a year, just in the Lower Mainland alone. The pictures we're about to show you are not a pleasant sight, but they are documented accounts of what happens in hospitals almost on a daily basis.
Bruises on the face of this boy who's only a year old. He had no defense. This young boy was punched by his father. He has a swollen and lacerated lower lip. These circular cuts on the legs of this boy were caused from being tied to a bed with cords while his mother went out for the day. And this boy has cigarette burns on his feet deliberately inflicted by a sadistic father. This boy was forcibly dunked and held in a scalding bath. These are examples of the more severe incidents of child abuse that the Helpline for Children is uncovering. Children are calling in to report, and even adults, as in this reenactment of a documented case.
Hello, Helpline for Children.
The helpline?
Yes.
Hi, I'm not sure whether I should be doing this. I don't really like the idea of getting somebody into trouble, but I'm kind of worried about my neighbor's kids. It sounded like they had some kind of ruckus over there this morning, and I think she might have hit one of the kids. The little girl's got a bruise on her face.
Really?
Yeah. The reason I'm calling is because, this happens a lot.
Well, what I'd like to suggest, you seem to be quite close with the kids, if you could perhaps spend some time with the kids the next little while. I'm also a little concerned about the 5-year-old girl being a little upset about what happened this morning. And what I'd like to suggest is we send a social worker out to talk with the kids and talk with you, and see if we can help out the situation at all.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I don't know, I just don't want my neighbor to be mad, you know?
Yeah, I think, well, my impression is I think it'd be really helping your neighbor.
And child abuse incidents are being reported largely because of high-profile TV commercials.
Child abuse and neglect hurts everyone. That's why we introduced the Helpline for Children. It's the number children can call if they need somewhere to turn. It's the number parents can call if they need help being a parent. You can call toll-free and anonymously 24 hours a day. Just dial operator and ask for Zenith 1234.
Operator, can I help you?
Give me Zenith 1234, please.
Helpline Supervisor Marnie Dunaway says the program has been a big success.
The hotline, or the Zenith Helpline, is doing the job that it was set up to do. We are taking, significant numbers of calls about fairly serious situations, and we're being able to respond to them, so we're feeling pretty positive about that.
Is it a situation where there's increased child abuse, or you're just uncovering what's already been there?
Well, I'm fairly firmly of the opinion that what's happening is that we're getting an increase in the reporting, because of course that was the whole point of setting up the helpline, to be a situation where people could call and describe the situation. And adults are doing that, and children are doing that in considerable numbers.
What kinds of calls?
Well, our calls range very, very widely. We have a large number of calls from children who are asking for personal counseling as much as anything. We also have calls from children in the middle of abuse situations. We have calls from children describing other children who are being abused. We have lots of calls from adults who are concerned about situations, and often with good reason.
Emergency Services social worker Brian McCaughey has one of the more difficult and depressing jobs in human resources. When a child abuse problem is reported, he has to investigate.
Just a few days ago, I got a call from a child, and it was from another community in BC, and he originally called because he felt that he was being disciplined really hard, and so we talked about being very unhappy with his father, basically. And so we got talking, and it turned out what had got him to call was that he had taken an extra cookie off the table at dinner that night, and his father had taken the belt and had given him quite a whipping, I think would be the word with it. And he did not think that was bad. He thought that he had deserved that, but he thought he wasn't getting along with his father and just wanted to talk about why he wasn't getting along with his father. I think it was an 11-year-old child. And the discipline that he was getting seemed very out of proportion to what was happening. And also that very night, the father had been drinking, and that there was a lot of noise going on in the background, and we were quite worried about the child in that sort of situation. The father was still very mad at him. And so we sent out, in this case, a social worker and the RCMP went out together in the community and ended up talking to the parents. And yes, the child, in fact, had bruises on him, and it was a very bad situation.
Big single factor, alcohol?
Certainly. If there's one single factor that's causing more harm to children, it's certainly alcohol.
Have you ever come across a situation where you've arrived at a home and the family is so drunk that they can't even take care of themselves, even other than the kid?
Yes, very, very definitely. We often will. That's one of the probably major reasons that we would remove children from a home, at least for a short period of time. Social workers only make the decision to remove a child, and then it's a judge who must decide what happens from that point on. But yes, that we'll go in and we'll find that the situation is there is just not anyone in the home that is fit at that moment to take care of the children. The children will be upstairs, or the children will be up or on the street. We'll get calls from neighbors saying that there's 4 or 5 children playing at night out on a street on a cold night, and we'll go by just to see what's happening, and we'll find that there's a huge party in progress, let's say, and that nobody seems to be able to take care of the kids, and we'll have to move in and do that. A very hard task to do sometimes.
Dr. Jim Carter heads up the child abuse team at VGH. He and the other doctors in the Children's Hospital deal daily with the real severe problems of child brutality.
The cases that we see are principally ones of physical injury and involve either superficial bruising or internal hemorrhaging, and occasionally associated with fractures. But we see cases of sexual abuse to a less extent, particularly where there's a medical complication, and we see perhaps severe cases of neglect, severe cases of malnutrition. We recognize that abuse can occur throughout the economic range of income, but I feel that it's perhaps seen more frequently in the lower income bracket. Abuse results even in those families that, or parents who show deficiencies in parenting, arise mostly because the families are faced with severe degrees of frustration. And these frustrations can come about from principally socioeconomic factors, such as loss of job, poverty, alcoholism, separation, divorce, difficulties in the family, and that. Most frequently we find that the explanation given is totally inappropriate for the injury that the child presents with.
Dr. Carter, just a moment ago, talked about sex abuse within the child abuse syndrome. It's a very large problem in the horror of the child abuse case. We'll look at that in just a moment. We told you at the beginning of this program that there are 8,000 cases of child abuse in British Columbia each year. The horrifying fact about that is that 20, perhaps as much as 30% of that is sex abuse in the home.
This is May, an 18-year-old who ran away from home when she was 11. For the last 4 years, she's been a prostitute and drug addict. On 2 occasions, she nearly died of an overdose. Her problems can be traced to sex abuse at home.
Dad had incest with my older sister, and she's 14 years older than me. And it lasted for a long time until finally my mom found out about it.
And she warned you about your father?
Yeah, and I didn't know what she was talking about because, you know, I didn't understand. I didn't know very much. Like, she started warning me at 10, I didn't know. What does a 10-year-old know, you know? Not very much.
And he began to visit you in the night, did he?
Yeah. And then I was freaking out, like I didn't know what to do. I was really scared. And I went over to my sister's apartment, and I didn't want to go home. Like, I just didn't want to. And I was crying, and she wanted to know what was wrong. And then I told her that Dad was being really strange. And she goes, "What do you mean?" And then she got it out of me that he used to come in and visit me all the time in the nighttime, you know, as soon as he thought I was asleep, and I was always afraid to go to sleep. And then we both started crying. And she said, "Well, don't let him get away with it. Next time he does it, say, you know, you're going to call the cops." And I was afraid to, but I did it. And he was begging me not to call the cops, and I told him that if he ever came near me, that I would, and I'd put him in jail forever. And after that, he never came and bothered me.
This is your father?
Yeah.
You left home?
I started, yeah, I ran away, and I started doing drugs and really screwed up because, I don't know, it was a shocking experience, you know? You don't know what to do.
You attribute a good deal of what happened to you after that to that experience with your father?
Yeah, and my mother knowing but not caring enough to lock him up or doing anything, you know?
Carol is also 18. She's led a life of a hooker and soft drug user. She hit the street or run away from home when she was sexually abused as a youngster.
I guess I was about 10, and I was in the gym working out and that, and my brother and some of his friends came in, and they jumped on me on the mats and stuff, you know. Not my brother, he just stood there.
Your brother stood there, and what, were they raping you?
Yeah, so to speak.
And what did your brother do?
He just stood there. He kind of thought it was a joke. Well, he was only like a couple years older than me, so he thought it was just fun and games, I guess.
So you were raped when you were 10?
Yeah.
Did any situation like that happen to you in latter years in your life, in other years?
Yeah, it did. I kind of withdrew from the, you know, the whole school atmosphere and stuff like that. And then I left home when I was about 13 going on 14. And then I went back to the same crowd of people later when I was about 15, and it happened again.
You raped again?
Right. And I got pregnant.
You got pregnant this time?
Yeah, and I was kind of scared to say anything because, I don't know, it was just kind of...
You had a baby, though?
Yeah, I did have it.
The situation when you were raped when you were 10
Mm-hmm.
by a bunch of boys, and raped again when you were, what, 15?
15, yeah.
What effects that had on your life, you know, your thoughts about what growing up's all about?
Well, it was kind of a shock. Like, you know, it shocked me. And I just kind of withdrew from a lot of things, you know.
It's hard to stay home. When you look at them both, you kind of have this hatred and disgust, you know. You can't live with someone that you hate and disgust. You know, you feel disgusted every time you look at them. It's really, try to live with someone like that, you know, it doesn't work. It doesn't. It's really sick.
Looking back at your experience and May's experience, as kids growing up in that kind of horrible experience, what do you think they should do about it?
I don't know. I think if it happens, they should, you know, be more open about it and, you know, try and have it some way that they could do something about it, because it's really bad, you know. Because I don't know. I guess it always screws you up a bit, right? Like, it's always there, you know. You don't really forget.
And this is where the children sexually abused at home or in other situations can turn. Before the helpline, there was no one to talk to about the real problems, and some of the incidents are being reported.
Well, a typical situation would be a teenage girl who's telling us that she's being sexually abused, or that her father or stepfather is having intercourse or anything up to that on repeated occasions. Sometimes it happens that is a single incident. We're pretty concerned about the incidents of sexual abuse. We're very pleased that the Zenith Line gives children who are too frightened to approach an adult directly and relate this information an opportunity to talk anonymously, because that's often the first step toward getting some help. But we're also very aware of the fact that for some children, the subject is so difficult that it's going to take a long period of contact before they're going to be able to relate that. Our immediate social work experience in Vancouver tells us that we've been involved with children who it's taken them 2 years after having been in close contact with a worker to be able to finally come out and say, look, this is one of the problems that I was having at home.
That kind of situation, Marnie, that you just described to me about a youngster phoning in and saying the father is sexually abusing him, has it been going on for months, or?
In some situations, a situation like that can be going on for an extended period of time. I think our experience has been that most frequently it has gone on for some time, sometimes months, sometimes years.
And you encourage that kind of call?
We would definitely encourage children to call us with that. That's one of the most painful situations that a child and a family can deal with, and it definitely calls for some kind of outside help and intervention.
And in a lot of cases, you're the only people they can contact?
Sure. We're certainly willing to involve ourselves immediately in a situation like that and ensure that the family and that the child get the help that they obviously need.
And the child sex abuse problem becomes even more of a horror story. Dr. Proctor has an abortion clinic in Seattle. He's had cases in his clinic of incest and pregnancy.
I have been involved with a few cases that was definitely a factor. It's the sort of a problem that I have a feeling that maybe not everybody admits to and may not even tell us about it, and we are not in the business of probing and trying to pick up on these things in an active way. However, it hasn't been a big problem as far as our experience has been, and yet it may be bigger than we realize.
Operator, can I help you?
Give me Zenith 1, 2, 3, 4, please.
These topics you must face. I have a panel this morning to advise, guide, and give us counsel. Dr. John Gossage, who is head of pediatrics at the Royal Columbian. Dr. Tietjen, who is a child psychology development and expert in that at UBC. And Brian Robinson, who is a social work consultant for the Ministry of Human Resources. Well, doctors and Brian, was the picture at all overpainted
I don't
in
think so.
Brian's report?
No,
Not at all.
Not at all.
Brian, what about police action in these things? Are we looking at it now purely as a social work problem to be dealt with by social work counselling, or do the police automatically come in and take the necessary action if they can get enough evidence?
It's a community problem, and obviously the RCMP from time to time, or the city police, have to be involved. There's no question about it. And it really places an emphasis on training of the police and social work people when they get involved in these very serious situations.
Now, about this hotline, psychologically speaking, as I was saying earlier, I was kind of hesitant and suspicious, a little bit critical of a hotline, which might raise a whole hullabaloo of phony calls from hysterical children or nasty calls from neighbours. What does the experience show? These thousands and thousands of calls, do they in fact represent a real exploding problem? Anne?
I think they do. I think it's much wiser to take some phony calls. I think the percentage is probably very low for calls that are really phony, and certainly we have to, if anything, err in the direction of taking more calls.
I'm going to continue with you for a second, though. We know the problem's there. It's always been there. Will it always be there? I mean, talking now, ordinary, decent people looking at Brian's report would think, oh my God, how could anybody do such a thing? Is there any way we're doing other than preaching to the converted? Do you think that we get to the people who have the problem and who might, because of this kind of explanation, do something about it?
I think in many ways we're not reaching the people who have the problem. We're just beginning to understand what the causes are for abuse, and there are some efforts in operation to try and do something about that, and also to prevent the problem from starting.
I would support that. I think that the whole area of sexual abuse well, it's representing now about 20% of the intake that we're receiving in our office. And the question of a runaway girl, if someone at home was touching her inappropriately, wasn't really asked until recently. And when this question is asked, the answers are often very shocking, and it puts a new light on the whole problem of the children who are alienated for one reason or another when that question is asked of them. So
you're telling me that up until comparatively recently, runaway girl was taken as a runaway girl for reasons other than sexual abuse?
Often that's
now what do you do when there's sexual abuse? Can you, if you get a father or a stepfather or an uncle, generally someone closely involved in the family, I do believe, who denies it and said nonsense, the girl is hysterical, do you have to take his word, or do you remove the child to be on the safe side?
No, I think our experience is that the children very rarely make up stories about sexual abuse. So I think that if you take it at face value, you have to do something, and you have to intervene. And often the perpetrator, usually the father, although sometimes we do have mothers and siblings that are perpetrators, they come up with all kinds of excuses if they do say that there was a problem. For example, I'd been drinking, or I was trying to educate my daughter, etc., etc. But for the most part, they're denying that there was any involvement sexually.
Now we come to the hospital. At what stage does the doctor actually become involved? Not necessarily in the kind of abuse we were demonstrating this morning, but in any kind of child abuse.
Well, in terms of the Royal Columbian group, we have to relate it to the communities we work in. So as far as our own area is concerned, we act in two ways. One is that we do exactly what Jim Carter talked about, which I thought illustrated the classic hospital approach very well. In addition to that, we act as consultants to the Ministry of Human Resources and the Attorney General, where the question arises as to whether an abusive situation exists and the answer isn't readily apparent. And this happens surprisingly often. It isn't always a clear-cut thing.
No, I can see that. In comes a baby with a battered face,
surely,
or scar marks on its legs, and presumably the parent finally has a surge of conscience and brings the child. Is that what happens?
That certainly can be one of the presentations. I think that very few parents batter maliciously. One of the theories that we've been working on, and it seems to find a good deal of support when you interview these families recurrently, is that it's not a question of whether these families don't love their children or are acting maliciously towards them. Rather, it is an inability, for reasons of background and things that were discussed on the film clip, that causes them not to be able to translate their feelings into appropriate child-rearing patterns. Oftentimes these people, as again was shown on the film clip, have been battered themselves as children, and this is all they know. And so that while they mean well, their manner of approach to the child or the young adolescent is totally inappropriate and emerges as battering.
In other words, they beat them up and they don't know why they're beating them up, unless, of course, it's a straight alcoholic rage or an alcoholic stupor.
That's right.
What do you do in these kind of cases? What can be done to teach these kind of people not to do it, apart from, said old-fashioned Webster, 6 months in the clanger, which you wouldn't support?
No, I wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. I realize that, but I'm giving you the, you know, the kind of obvious public reaction. Somebody who beats a little kid, certainly, you know, the average public reaction is not to counsel him, it's to put him in the slammer. What can be done? Can you give me any case histories of how you can change an attitude without a magic wand?
It's a very, very difficult thing to do, and ideally, the place to start is at the beginning, when the relationship between the child and the parent is just beginning, and to enable the parent to interact with the child in a sensitive and a flexible way, to become aware of the child's needs, and also to become aware of the parent's own needs, their own needs. Very often, parents who abuse their children have enormous needs that just aren't met, and they're under a great deal of frustration, as was shown in the film.
You're suggesting, therefore, that the only way to do it in the future is to start with the mother and child and teach her how to love the baby, and the father and mother not to be alcoholics and to have enough money to live decently.
Of course.
Poverty, poverty is the great problem, is it not?
Yes, it is.
In many, many cases.
Yes.
Do we have it? You work with the police too on this kind of thing, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Right.
And I work with the social workers who go out and investigate these cases.
With the police? Now,
the police are not involved all the time. I think it's important to know that that's a real threat to the family in terms of our interventions. Police are involved in sexual abuse cases as a matter of policy, but in the great majority of cases, the police are not involved. That presents too much of a threat and awkwardness in terms of our intervention. And we go in to initially help the family, but if we find that there isn't that response to our concern, other stronger measures often have to be taken.
I was just going to say, I think that it should be emphasized that there are two objectives in intervening when a report comes through. One is to address the immediate issue of the protection of the child, and on that basis one has to immediately address the question of whether the child should be taken from the family or not. The second and more long-range thing is to address the best interests of the child, and we have to remember that apprehension is itself potentially harmful to the child, so it's a two-edged sword, and one has to act very responsibly in recommending whether apprehension should occur or not. And I think that the key to the work that is being successfully done is a very, very flexible approach, which recognizes that most abusive families can be helped. I believe there are some that are malicious. I didn't used to think so, but I think there are some. And there's where your clangor certainly comes in, whatever we feel. But I think it's a very small percentage who are that way. Most families want help and are potentially receptive to it, and one wants to simultaneously protect the child and recognize that most families are vulnerable to help.
Break with my panel of experts on child abuse, and we're going to take some calls from you two shortly after this commercial interruption. I'm going to take calls to Dr. Gossage and Dr. Tietjen and to Brian Robinson, but first I want to make a point. I've been taking calls about child abuse as a radio open line reporter for 1,000 years. Nowadays, we don't get any calls at all, really, about that. Is that because of the helpline, or is it because your facilities are approaching something that can cope with most of the problem?
I think it's because the system has improved. And I'm not saying we've got it well nailed down, but the system has really improved, I'd say, over the last 5 years tremendously. And I think the Zenith line is just one aspect of those improvements that have been made.
Yeah,
for example, the child abuse team, family support workers, child care workers, easy access to legal counsel for social workers. All these things have improved. And I'd just like to add very recently, soon we're going to be opening up the Sid Israel treatment facility in Vancouver, which the Vancouver Child Abuse Team has had a lot to do with. And that's going to certainly help in terms of treating children and their families with regard to child abuse.
You mean as a unit?
As a unit, yes.
How do you handle this kind of assessment problem in the Columbian?
Well, we use the ward of the Columbian as an observation, a safe observation post, if you like. All our staff are trained in the documentation and observation of children who are abused or potentially deprived.
You may make mistakes sometimes. Somebody may come in with a bad bruise in the leg or the knee or the buttocks or something, and you're so suspicious you might ignore the fact that it was a legitimate accident.
Surely, and we recognize that. I think one of the keys to successful working in the abuse field is the close cooperation amongst various people who are working in the field, just both to more thoroughly document and also to avoid exactly what you're talking about. And I think I'd like to add that one of the key things in the success that I think is gradually coming about in the Lower Mainland is the recognition of a need for a very tight network amongst the various helping agencies, and some of the theoretical work that Anne has done has helped us in this. But the very close cooperation amongst a community-based group such as the Child Abuse Team.
But if it comes to evidence in court, are doctors willing nowadays to testify? They didn't used to be. They used to hide their heads underneath the tables, didn't they?
I spend an inordinate amount of time in court, Jack, and my colleagues in medicine, I think, are beginning to think I'm neglecting them.
But you know the point I'm making.
Yes.
In other words, the doctors are now really much more boldly facing up to responsibilities in cases of extreme doubt.
I can only speak for the physicians in the community I deal with, and I think that there has been a tremendous willingness on the part of the physicians in the 6 communities that I deal with to, in an early way, recognize potential abuse situations and to ask for help in documenting them. It's a changing field, and I think part of the problem is the knowledge explosion.
I threw at you the kind of offhand remark that poverty was one of the real basic problems. Am I right or am I wrong?
Both. Oftentimes poverty can cause enormous stresses that make it difficult for parents to deal with their children in the way that they would like to. But I'd also like to stress that poverty is not the only circumstance. Child abuse can occur at all economic levels. And I'd like to suggest that one of the factors that is perhaps more important than poverty is social isolation, and that's something that can happen at all economic levels.
By social isolation, in my language, you mean loneliness?
Yes.
But loneliness in a big city like this?
Of course, yes. It's very easy to be isolated in a big city like
Because
this.
so many people are newcomers, aren't they?
Yes, I think so. And as you're well aware, I think it's not the highest suicide rate in Canada, in the west end of Vancouver, which is the highest concentration of population.
But I mean, let's say that's because we have the best statistics. That's one of the kind of West Coast defenses. Suicide and loneliness, of course, are things really quite a... No, loneliness is not apart from child beating.
Not at all, not at all. It's a very important factor in our investigation, is the isolation factor. And I think, too, that this morning we're really emphasizing physical and sexual abuse, whereas there's a tremendous amount of emotional abuse and neglect that occurs in our communities. So
we haven't got enough social workers in the world to deal with the emotional abuse within families, have we?
We have enough to take care of some of the more profound emotional abuse.
At least you don't have to deal with or do you have to deal with the results of emotional abuse?
Most assuredly, yes. Most assuredly we do, at the medical level, at the social work level. I think one of the things that we're discovering is that by its very nature it's the hardest to define it's the hardest for parents to accept a need for help for.
That's right.
And therefore, it perhaps requires the greatest amount of resources.
Final question, I want to go around all three of you on this. Is discipline, is reasonable paternal or maternal discipline, and I'm talking about physical discipline, is that now a total and absolute no-no?
That's no. I think children need that discipline. They need to be cared for and helped to make decisions. And
Can I smack a child if I have to?
I think when you say that, you have to be careful about all the people who are watching this program who think that that gives license, because Webster says it's okay, then I can, we're talking about over-spanking. We're talking about the child who's spanked every day. We're talking about the child who is often bruised and injured. Those are the things that when we're looking, but the regular kind of discipline that we've all experienced.
You set a limit.
You set
for
a
your
limit.
children's
That's
behavior
right.
about crossing busy roads at high noon, and that limit must be obeyed.
And no one, I don't think anyone in the community will challenge that.
I've got to try that one on Anne.
I think that physical punishment should be saved for a last resort, and there are lots of other ways that can be used before it's time for...
And such physical punishment must be moderate, reasonable, and non-injurious.
Yes.
More humiliating than anything else.
That's right.
If it gets into a cycle, then it's no longer effective.
Yes, I would support that entirely as a father of teenagers.
Okay. Yes. They may phone in and say, hey, the old man, where shall I go? Shall I take a call? Go ahead, please, if you're on the topic.
Yes. There's a few things that I want to talk about. One was when this helpline started, okay, it took off really well. They got a lot of calls. But what happened, okay, I've been involved with quite a few social workers. And what they told me is that they can't stand the caseload, these added things on their caseload, and they're not hiring new people to look after, this added caseload. And it's overextending them. And
Good point. Has the helpline driven you into the ground, and do you not have enough people to deal and check out and handle the helpline?
We figured that that would be the first question asked, and for sure it's created strains, but I think we'd rather deal with that than deal with the other side of it. And I think too it's put demands in terms of training social workers, and even the image of social workers. You know, the old image of the male social work being kind of wimpish, and the female in the tweed suit and the boots and talking with her hands and chain smoking. That kind of image is changing, and this whole area of child protection is really placing a need in that area.
And you will, within the limits of the situation, push for all the staff you need anyway.
We sure will.
May I make a comment, John?
Yes.
I think one of the things that, as a physician working in the field, I think one of the things it's done is to verify the statistics that we've been suggesting are representing the incidence of the problem. As you're well aware, the number of actual documented cases previously in BC was very low, sort of 300, 400, and we just knew that wasn't true. And I think what the helpline has done is, in a very visible and dramatic way, documented the huge size of the problem, and I think is giving a very large message to government about the resources that are going to be required if this problem is to be addressed properly.
If a case does not check out, does the record stay on the helpline, or does it disappear?
No, you're talking about the registry in Victoria, the Child Abuse Registry, and there is an erasure procedure.
Just as well, isn't it? Go ahead, please.
Hello there. I'm a student in the School of Social Work, and actually my question is very much along the lines of the first one, unfortunately, because in my field placement I've encountered social workers who have really been overwhelmed or overburdened by the amount of work that's been added to their caseload because of the Zenith line, and although they think it's a tremendous idea, they're also kind of curious as to whether or not the SOCRED government is willing to make the helpline more of a sort of a PR job and put some teeth or some muscle into it in terms of being able to supply more social workers to deal with the problems that are coming up.
Well, that's a political answer, and depends entirely on the pressure of the government. We can take you, Doctor, on that one.
Well, I think that the helpline, as an isolated service of the government, is useless other than verifying the statistics that we have been talking about. I would like to think that the government recognizes that the helpline is the first step first and necessary step in the establishment of a comprehensive network of services for these families. And if that's the case, then I feel that it has been an excellent first step.
I'd like to think that too, and I hope that that's the case, and I hope that the government, if they are presented with statistics, does move towards being able to provide more social work services for people who need it.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead from Powell River.
Yes, I'd like to know, we're starting a family referral center here in Powell River, and I've been working quite extensively with it. And I was wondering if any of the people there find that the statistics for child abuse, if it's more for rural areas or, you know, where there isn't as much help as what they have in the major cities for this.
Okay, we cover from Boundary Road out to Chilliwack, and we're dealing the emergency services aspect of the program deal with about 800 calls per month, and of that, roughly 10% are child abuse. And the calls coming in directly to us average about 50. So we have 130 calls that we're dealing with per month. And so that's outside of the Vancouver area.
You're largely rural area, although you've got Surrey involved in that too, haven't you?
That's right, Surrey's there.
If I would like to get some more information regarding statistics and that, who would be the best person to contact for that?
Well, I'll help her.
Brian Robinson, yes. Address?
1062 Austin in Coquitlam.
1062 Austin, Austin, Coquitlam. Thank you. One more segment with my doctors and my social worker after the break. Child abuse, and the helpline, and the hotline, and the hospital projects, and the social workers. It's an awful problem. We didn't really know how bad it was until we got the Zenith line, did we?
Well, we had an idea there was a problem out there, but the Zenith line certainly emphasized it. I'd just like to clarify one point, Jack, that the previous caller made with regard to caseloads. I think that what we're forced to do is prioritize the cases coming in and give a lot of emphasis to the infants because they can't speak up, they can't run away, and they really need our protection.
What's your advice for any child who faces sexual abuse within or close to the family? Leave at once?
Get help in one way or another, whether it's from a neighbor or friend, somebody they can trust, and make contact with somebody.
The neighbor's not going to help them.
Well,
maybe they will.
Yes, they might, and I think neighbors should be encouraged to help and to be involved.
Go ahead, please.
It was mentioned earlier that hysterical or unwanted calls from allegedly abused children are assumed to happen at a really low percentage. But I was wondering now, with the ad campaign increasing awareness on the part of children in general in the community, how much more hysterical calls or those type of unwarranted calls could you foresee?
I really don't have that
answer. You can't guess it. You can't guess it. It merely means that your assessment must be really well done, critical, and supported by on-the-spot visits.
That's right.
Children, I think, seldom cry for help without a reason.
That's right.
And the reason may be misleading, but there's a reason there, and I would be loath to ignore any.
Go ahead, please. Where from?
Hardy.
Port Hardy. Speak up, please.
Yes, I was wondering if they've gotten any feedback yet on the manual that was sent out by the Ministry of Human Resources, and also on more of the mental abuse as it states in that book.
Who knows about this manual?
I can try to answer that. The manual is something that we've been looking forward to, a cooperation between the four ministries, and the deputy ministers have been getting together for a long time planning this out. And it's too bad that there was that adverse publicity about the cover, because inside that document is something that's very helpful. And there are some problems with it, but we're going to update it from time to time.
I won't even mention what I think of that stupid attack on the cover. However, that's beside the point. Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please. Where are you?
I'm right here.
Speak up.
Right.
Jack. I've had past experiences with the social workers before. I have 4 children, 4 teenagers, and my oldest girl did run away once. And when she ran away, the social workers had her placed in a large home for other children who'd run away from a home too. And at the time, her problem really was that her friends were overloading her. She's a very emotional girl. She kind of takes care of her friends' problems. And
was this to do with child abuse or what?
It's not really, but the thing is, what I'm getting at is what they're going to do with children who really have child abuse or...
How long ago was this?
Home. It's like putting a cart before the horse here. There's no place for them. This home she went to, the children were doing what they liked. There was a wee 9-year-old boy there just smoking as if he had a chimney up on top of his head.
Well, you're into the condition in some homes which have been criticized in the past, and hopefully they too have improved over the years. You're not adding anything to my topic, though. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. I'm very upset here, very nervous. What do you do in a case like my daughter and I have both been sexually abused by a male social worker, and I know I have several cases in which this has happened. Who do you contact? I mean,
ma'am, how long ago did this happen?
Around 3 years ago, and it's just coming out now.
What do you mean it's just coming out now?
I'm just coming out with this now because...
I'll tell you what we'll do, ma'am, and it's the only possible way I can handle it, is that Linda will take your number off the air, and Mr. Robinson will take that number with him and do what's necessary. If there's a reason to investigate, I'm quite sure that he will look after it and make sure it goes through the proper channels.
I'd be most pleased to, yes.
I mean, we're not going to take a generalized libel against all social workers on the basis of one so far anonymous phone call. Will you take that now, Linda? I'll put her on hold, and you get the name and number. Go ahead, please.
Hello, I'm a 22-year-old woman who was sexually molested by a grandfather, an uncle, and numerous people that were working for my father from about the ages of about 7 years old to about I would say 11 or 12.
And you want to tell us the effects of this on you, or you want to tell us...
Well, I have some questions. Along with this, I grew up in a home, and incidentally, I don't think that it, in my own experience, coming from a home where both my parents were professional people, I don't think that it matters whether or not you come from a home low income or you know, lack of education, or whether you come from a home where there are...
Did you survive adequately without any professional help?
This is what I wanted to put to your panel is...
Please do.
Is in later on in life, is there a marked damage that is done to people by this? Along with sexual abuse, I was also beaten by my mom and my dad, who is now dead. Mm-hmm. And I have 2 younger siblings that are living at home, and I was wondering if there is any way of kind of getting professional help and making my one parent get help.
Okay, good question.
I think,
help.
Here's the answer.
She's taking the first step right now by calling. She's coming out with it, and with regard to the effect on children, it has a profound effect on children. Little girls find it very difficult to relate to their peers in school because of this activity going on at home. They have difficulties with boyfriends. When they get married, they have difficulties, and I think Dr. Gossage could emphasize that.
Yes. Yes, I think that I agree with Brian. She's taking the first step right now by speaking out about it. One of the problems we have in dealing with sexual abuse is that it's been the last of the abuse group to be spoken out about. It's the last great taboo. And I think the very fact that she's speaking about it and that's the first step in getting help. And I think she should certainly...
She's also worried about the siblings still in the home.
Yes.
What should she do?
I think that she could contact any member of the panel here, and we'll put her on to some help.
Take a number. Would you? If you give your number, I'll give it to Brian, and something will be done about it. Gentlemen and Dr. Tietjen, our time is up. I'm never that comfortable in these programs. They must be done. And what's the final message you want to give youngsters especially, or parents, let's put it this way, parents who know and want help, what are they supposed to do?
Reach out for it.
To whom?
To MHR, to the helpline. There are lots of places that they can reach out to.
You'll take calls from parents too on the helpline?
Certainly.
Saying, I've got a problem, I beat the devil out of my kid and I don't know why I do it.
Well, those are the calls that we really like to get, because already you've got something to work with. You're not going in cold into the situation, knocking on a strange door and saying, I've got this concern about your child. They're already concerned themselves, and that's a big step.
That's a big step. Dr. Gossage.
I would support what they say, and I would add that particularly for people where the involved network that we have doesn't exist, that the family doctor is a tremendous resource, and most family doctors, I believe, are very good listeners and are trusted people and should be contacted early.
My thanks to Dr. Tietjen from UBC, to Brian Robinson from Human Resources, and to John Gossage from the Royal Columbian. Next, I'm going to talk to Dr. David Bates, the chairman of the Royal Commission on the Uranium Caper in British Columbia, after the break.
Well, he's had awful problems learning the vocabulary, but he's a very nice guy. That's produced by an agency for us so that he's free to write what he likes. And
Dr. David Bates, a distinguished man of medicine in many other fields in British Columbia, took on the job of being chairman of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into uranium mining in British Columbia. And there's been a lot said and reported and done about it, not too much on this program, I'm afraid, should have been. I can think of the big fuss over the Korean caper. I can think of the place where all kinds of, some kind of active material was lying around in somebody's yard. I can think of all the concern about water supplies. I can think of all the political promises about no uranium mining now or never. And I can think of all the other people who've sat here and said uranium is absolutely essential. 35% of Ontario's power comes from nuclear plants, and therefore there must be uranium one day, perhaps from BC, to supply it. So I come straight to Dr. David Bates and say, Dr. Bates, when will you finish?
We're about halfway through. We started a year ago, and I think we'll be all finished just about a year from now.
Obviously, you cannot tell me what you're going to decide, but you could refresh my memory on your terms of reference on what your report will cover.
Yes. Well, fortunately, let me say that those terms of reference restrict us, in a sense, to whether the present federal provincial regulations, jurisdiction, and so on are adequate. What else is required in relation to uranium mining, and what is needed to protect the public, the workers and the environment, if mining was allowed to proceed.
In other words, your basic terms of reference kind of envisage the fact that some form of uranium mining is likely to take place in the future.
Well, let's be realistic. Southeast of Kelowna, there's $400 million worth of uranium under a cap of basalt, sitting there.
In the ground?
In the ground.
In its natural...
In its natural position.
Right now, and so therefore...
It's worth about $400 million. So the question of whether that should be allowed to be mined out and how to do it is a real question. We're not talking about hypothetical issues here. We're talking about a real question.
But that is a political decision based on legislation in the future.
That's right. We entrust those ultimate decisions to the politicians.
Whereas you have to look at it and say, the present regulations, federal and provincial, are they adequate, one, to protect the health of the workers, the health of the residents, and the water or whatever they drink?
Yeah, and I think that you've just made a very important point, that dealing with uranium in the north of Saskatchewan, or even I would say in Elliott Lake in Ontario, is one thing, but here that deposit sits on the watershed of the two Kettle Rivers. It's not very far from Kelowna. It's not very far from where water is used to irrigate crops or orchards and this kind of thing. So for this particular deposit, we have a new set of questions in British Columbia. They're not the questions that have been dealt with already in northern Saskatchewan. Much of the thinking there wouldn't apply. So that we have a very real problem to confront, and our job as a commission is to bring everything out in public in relation to the dangers, the hazards, the disasters that have occurred elsewhere. You've read of some of those.
In specific areas too?
Yes.
In other words, you'll have to recommend on this $400 million worth, which is probably now with inflation $1 billion worth.
No, I've given you about the right figure.
The right figure.
Yeah.
$400 million worth. If that can be practically mined with the proper safety factors of the people there and elsewhere in British Columbia.
Yes, what is the risk involved? How do we decide how great that risk is? What would you reasonably require of the regulating authority? You mentioned in your introduction that you'd been made aware of a problem down in Surrey with some radioactive waste material kind of stuck in barrels.
Right. In fact, I read it in one of your excellent digests here again this morning.
Well, we had the chairman of that citizens group, and of course he raised, I think you'll see there in that digest, his last question to the witnesses from the Atomic Energy Control Board. Well, look, if we can't handle this little problem, kind of 80 tons of material properly, how can we expect to handle hundreds of thousands of tons?
It's right here. Yeah. Mr. Barkfed said the answers are less than satisfying. If the Atomic Energy Control Board can't look after 85 tons of radioactive waste, what the devil is going to happen if uranium mining happens in the province of BC?
It's a good question.
It is, because you, as a commissioner for largely the interests of British Columbia, correct?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
You're looking at this mining, and you're going to have to say in your final report, okay, if this mining is done in this area on this basis, it might conceivably be socially acceptable. I'm not We're being very, very hypothetical. But then you've got to look at the federal regulations and say, will the regulations properly dispose of the waste?
Yes, and who supervises it, and how has it worked in the past? And what have we learned from Elliott Lake? You know, I think there's another remark that was made at one of the meetings here on nuclear energy, which I think reflects an attitude of mine. If we're going to make any mistakes in British Columbia, at least they should be new ones.
No old mistakes.
That's right.
In other words, no building of homes on top of tailings.
Oh, no, but I mean that's very primitive. We've taken a very close look, for instance, at what the Australian Royal Commission has recommended for its uranium development. We've had one of their commissioners here answering questions last week, Dr. Kerr, and we've looked very carefully at their report, and they have approached the question of Australian uranium very much as I think we are approaching it in British Columbia.
Now, can you give me, perhaps from his testimony or your knowledge, can you tell me, one, have they come to a firm policy in Australia? Are they going to allow uranium mining? And what are they going to do with the waste?
They're going to allow uranium mining for a start. They don't use uranium themselves. They've no nuclear power reactor, so it's all for export. They've laid very stringent conditions on how it's to be mined. All the tailings, the waste material, is to be put back in the pit and then covered completely with rock and earth, so that the Aboriginals who actually use that territory, it's in the far north of Australia, will be able to walk freely, move about, hunt, all the usual activities after it's finished. There's nothing kind of radioactive with a fence around it. So they've insisted on that. They've done a very interesting thing too. They've insisted, and the government has brought it in, that a man be appointed called a supervising scientist with a staff, and he is publicly accountable, rather like an auditor general, you know. If every year he has to tell the public what's going on, he has to make the measurements public, he has to be responsible for protection. It's the first time in the parliamentary system that they live under and we live under that anyone has tried to set up a separate thing. They say categorically that the problem of regulation and monitoring couldn't be left to the Australian Atomic Energy Commission nor to the industry, and nor by implication to a government department. They've made a separate thing. Now, nobody knows whether that's going to work. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm seeing the man who's been appointed to do that.
It will depend entirely on the caliber of the supervising scientist.
Well, that's why I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks and find out how he's getting on.
But their answer to the primary ore body waste is back in the ground and recap it.
Back in the ground.
Dr. Bates, the Chairman of the Royal Commission into Uranium Mining in British Columbia, after the break. Dr. David Bates is chairman of the Royal Commission into Uranium Mining in British Columbia. Can you recommend that no mining take place at all, if you so wish?
I think the answer there is that you could see that we could make the conditions so stringent that it would not be economic to attempt to mine it.
Do you want to give me any hints at all today?
No.
No hints
It's
whatsoever.
too early. We're halfway through.
Yes.
And we'll be back in the communities in September, October, and everybody will be looking for hints. But we're not really in a position yet. We're only halfway through the
Are you going to, in the communities, are you just going to those which are particularly interested in the interior?
We're responding to many communities that wrote to us that we didn't get to first time round. Penticton, Vancouver Island communities we never went to, and there are others. And we're going back to some old friends like Atlin in the far north and Kelowna, which have new things to say to us. And this is a chance for people who've been following us, and that digest you have in front of you is going to 800 people in the province at their request.
And people who want a copy of it can write to you and ask for it.
And it's sent to them freely, and many people are watching the Channel 10. You know, we're on television 5 hours a day, and I don't know how people manage to watch that, but the letters we get, a lot of people are taking in bits of it, so that they'll be ready for us in the communities in September.
Oh, don't be puzzled by people managing to watch it. A lot of people watch this for 90 minutes of this unearthly hour in the morning, you know.
Yes.
Now, exploration is now going on in British Columbia.
Yes, we were heavily criticised for not immediately, we were formed, telling the government it had to stop it, you know,
Right.
and we took a lot of criticism for that, but with hindsight, which is always a great advantage, as you'll agree, the fact that we allowed it to continue has proved useful. We wouldn't have uncovered the uranium lying around in Summerland and in the Okanagan if there'd been a stop put to it. We wouldn't have uncovered the extent of the radioactivity in the north if everyone had said stop all exploration. What we said in our first report was let's license it, let's bring it under control. And this the government is preparing to do. They've assured us that they're working hard to get that into place.
Now, but, you know, surely looking for a mine and drilling a hole isn't going to cause any great environmental hazard to anyone.
Well,
I mean, the uranium's
think
there.
not, wouldn't you?
No,
But
I can walk through an area in BC surely at the moment and suffer from natural radiation.
Oh yes. Well, that isn't the problem. The problem is when you're talking about exploration, which is called grid drilling. You're now going to put 400 holes 200 feet down on a 10 by 10 grid kind of thing. Now that's different. And you're going to do it where there's already underground water flowing, and if you have some cattle or sheep in the interior and they're watered by a well and somebody comes and begins drilling into some ore body, you want to know that there's no possibility of your well being contaminated. And there's such flow in the aquifers, as they're called, underneath, that putting drill holes down, as we've heard in testimony, can well contaminate some watercourse that turns up in a well used by cattle or for irrigation, so that there are potential hazards. I'm not saying they're very great. Yeah, it's not a matter of you being at hazard from radioactivity.
Here's perhaps a silly question. Somebody does put down 400 drill holes in an area which is not going into an aquifer.
Well, you're bound to. If you put holes 200 feet down the road,
You've
there's
got
water.
to go into
You're
what?
bound to intersect faults and water flowing.
Would it help at all though, if you capped these drill holes when you finished?
Yes, that's a good precaution, because in heavy times of snow melt and this kind of thing you can get contamination, and that's just good practice and is insisted on. As a matter of fact, in Alberta, for instance, we have very stringent regulations about sealing up holes properly. We've had a rather less stringent program in British Columbia, and we felt that needed tightening up.
Tell you what, I think we're going to take some phone calls here now, but just before we do that, you mentioned the Australian plan to put the ore waste back in the ground. Have you had any other cogent propositions about the disposition of mining waste?
Well, yes, we have technical evidence of new techniques to dry the tailings, to instead of having all this sort of water coming out with containing the tailings, to dry them, and then the possibility of disposing them in a dry form. This is still experimental, but in some parts of the West, the dry West of the United States, it's feasible. Whether it's feasible in our heavier rainfall area, we're not sure.
Am I right in saying that uranium mining is essential for the power needs of this country in the future?
Yeah, I think I can't answer that. We've not been a commission to try and balance different power options for British Columbia, and I wish there'd been a commission doing that, because a lot of the public, members of the public, have wanted to come in front of us to answer those questions. Now, we've not been charged to answer those questions, but I'll just give you the quote from Chancellor Schmidt, which hangs in the mind. Some months ago, Chancellor Schmidt said that to him, the main reason why we had to have nuclear power in the interim is to prevent a world war to defend oil. Now, he said that in June of this year, and Chancellor Schmidt is one of the more intelligent European leaders, I think we might agree.
Agreed.
And he made this his main reason why Germany, for instance, had to be able to develop some nuclear power, because otherwise, he said, the hazard of a major world war about oil is too great.
Funny though, just last night, did you see Carter?
I saw him, I heard, yes,
in
I did.
effect, he said, move into the Middle East to steal our oil supplies and we'll stop you.
Yes, I know. So
your questions now to Dr. Bates on the Uranium Mining Royal Commission after the break. Call from Kelowna to Dr. Bates. Go ahead, please.
Hello. When Bill Bennett was in Kelowna December 12th, 50 people held a demonstration against uranium mining at the opening of a new Cancer Society building. Bennett told the demonstrators that the Bates Royal Commission does have a mandate to recommend against mining. I wondered what you have to say to that.
Well, I think if I interpret what he said right, and I do get copies of letters being sent by ministers to members of the public, and they all really say the same thing, that it's well within our mandate to lay down such conditions of stringency that in fact it would be impossible for mining to occur. And that, I think, is exactly what he was saying, and I think that's always been the case between the government and the Royal Commission. We're not prevented in any way from expressing that viewpoint.
Right. So if at the end of the hearings you are convinced that it cannot be done safely, could you say, I really recommend that we do not allow mining in BC?
I think that would be quite apparent from the report when it comes to be written. In other words, the magnitude of the hazards will be spelled out, the problems we would all confront if it did occur, and perhaps even the view which many people have put to us from the public, that this decision should not be taken frivolously.
Right.
If hazard is involved, then we might accept it under certain conditions, but not under all conditions. And that, I think, has been well expressed to us.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I was wondering, where can you get those journals you mentioned on the report?
On the Uranium Inquiry Digest. And I think you get them by right in Bob Shaw?
Yes, it's
right to Bob Shaw, 1198 West Pender.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bob Shaw, 1198 West Pender, which is in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. They're good. Well, worth reading. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a question there. Is it not true that a sophisticated garbage burner would produce just as much energy as all the energy you get from uranium? Even Germany, which you mentioned you mentioned Helmut Schmidt. Germany, with this so-called shortage on energy, they still get 150 million tons of coal laying around.
We have 10 billion tons at Hat Creek. 10 billion tons of coal at Hat Creek.
There you have it. So why?
Go on, Dr. Bates.
Well, I think the important thing which we should all realize is that we don't face any option without penalties. I don't know whether you've been following the problems of coal burning the problems of acid rain, the problems of long-range transmission of sulfur dioxide across from Britain to Norway, for instance. So that certainly we can use coal, but probably we'll have to use it much better than we've used it in the past.
I was talking about sophisticated burners, not
yes.
the old-type burners.
No, quite right. Well, I think that you're quite right in suggesting that those options should be explored. I don't think anyone would say that the solution is the same for each country. And I don't think that anyone would say that, that we're in possession of enough information to know, as if it was absolutely known, what the right course is.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. I was watching a show a while back on nuclear energy. It was broadcast from West Germany. And one of the things that they said was that they're looking for a place to build a new kind of or to explore this new kind of nuclear energy that does not leave any nuclear waste.
Oh, I can never get the difference between fission and fusion.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of work going on in relation to that in the United States and in Europe, and it's centered in Germany. It's actually a common market research plan with the French, the British, and the Germans all involved. Most estimates believe that's 20 to 25 years away.
Which is which? Fission and fusion?
Well, this is fusion that he's talking about.
He's talking about fusion.
A new method of fusion,
and
which would be without waste.
Let's face the practicalities of life. I said at the beginning that Ontario, I think 35% of its power comes from nuclear, does it not?
Yes, and in France, 45% of its electricity from nuclear.
And Britain?
I think it's about 20.
About 20%.
I haven't got the figures.
So therefore, in this case, we are dealing with a live, usable energy source presently in being.
Yes, indeed. And Japan, of course, has no option. It has no natural energy and a huge industrial problem. And Japan, and interestingly, the Japanese were the first people to find uranium in British Columbia. I mean, you knew that, 1963.
No, I didn't know that.
And that, again, is near Beaverdale, the same source.
We've had no uranium mining, am I right?
No, we've had no uranium mining. They found a deposit then, and the Japanese were looking for it in 1963 because they realized that their own energy would be very much dependent on all sources, and they were developing their nuclear industry at that time.
I suppose the two big sources available there for Canada and Australia for Japan.
Saskatchewan, too.
Or Canada, generally speaking.
Oh, yes, Canada. Yes, that's right. I'm sorry.
They are mining now in Saskatchewan.
Yes, they are. They have for a long time mined in Saskatchewan, but they're developing a new deposit, which is the richest in the world.
Is that the one at Clough
Lake?
Clough Lake.
It's only the size of a football field, Jack, but it's 40% uranium. Now, Elliott Lake, which has 26 miles of underground workings, is mining ore that is about 0.5% uranium. Clough Lake is 40%, the richest ever found.
And there's just no argument.
Well, there's a lot of argument, and they had a commission, and there are a lot of problems in mining that safely because the radiation dose to men who are close to that may be unacceptably high, and they're approaching it with great caution.
But they are doing it.
They are doing it.
Last call. Go ahead, please.
About the nuclear power in Ontario, I think that we should correct that there's 5% of the nuclear is of the power. They produce about 30% of the electricity, but that isn't really what I called about. Dr. Bates made a comment about the Blizzard deposit being worth $400 million, and I'd like to hear his comment about the that being at the present price and about any kind of assurance that that kind of price will pertain in view of the cancellations for so many nuclear power plants. And the other thing is on the supervising scientist in Australia. What can a supervising scientist do if he finds that a tailing impoundment is leaking into a river body?
Ma'am, just hold your breath. Of time for a very short answer.
Yeah, I think that was Mrs. Lois Boyce. I know her voice by this time, one of the participants from the United Church. The last question first. That's one of the things I want to find out. What powers has he to do anything if he finds something wrong? Is he just a reporter, or has he actual powers? I don't know the answer to that, and that's one of the things I hope to find out about. My $400 million is based on $40 a pound and 100 million pounds. So that, I'm sorry, 10 million pounds at $40 a pound. I read projections of what uranium is going to be worth, but I'm not an economist, and I really have no idea how valid they are.
Thanks, ma'am, and my thanks to Dr. David Bates, Chairman of the Royal Commission on Uranium Mining, and we shall be hearing more and seeing more from him when he starts his fall sittings. When?
Oh, I'm in the middle of them now.
But you're going up country?
It's September.
September. My thanks to Dr. David Bates. Webster, after the break. Tomorrow, David Anderson, Liberal, Jack Phillips, Communist, and Jane Hughes, Woman. Lots of time, 9 a.m. precisely.